Good day. I'm Olckers now with my co-host, Dr. Emile, and our guest, Professor Stephen Shore. How are you guys doing?
Oh, doing fine here. It's a great day here in New York. It's about 10 degrees Celsius, and it's sunny.
I'm well, thanks, thank you, and happy Autism Acceptance and Awareness Day.
The same to you too. Um, okay, there is, of course, as always with autism, a lot of controversy going along with it. Not everybody is happy, and it's like someone once said, getting autistic people to agree on something is like herding cats.
Yes, and I must say that we are quite fortunate to be able to have Professor Shaw here, as you've often to remind us that it's not only Autism Acceptance Day, or Awareness Day, but it's also the importance of it is to remember that we are autistic as well. And Stephen, can you maybe just explain to us the reason why you place emphasis on this, that it's important to know that you're autistic?
Oh, well, I believe it's vitally important for people to understand their own characteristics, their own strengths, and their own challenges. And being autistic, it gives us a certain set of strengths and challenges. And if we're in touch with our own strengths and challenges, we can focus on what we're good at and promote our success. Every autistic person I know who is successful has found a way to parlay their strengths into something that society values, and commonly that translates into employment. Now, on the challenges end of things, that's also important because we need to know what the barriers are that are preventing our success, and also we need to know what to effectively advocate for when we need support.
Well, I think it's very similar to what my father always said. Okay, it was of how I express this. It's not how I see autism, but it gives me the philosophy on how to deal with it. My father always said that if you give a demon a name, you've got control over it. Okay, I don't see this demon, but know what it is, and we can learn from it what it is, then we can understand ourselves.
Yeah, that's right. The key to success is understanding.
Stephen, you have been in a lot of international journals, or you've written and contributed a lot to a lot of international journals. You are currently back from a long trip to Malaysia, and previously you were also in Saudi Arabia. Now, if I can just remind the viewers that those parts of the world are known as parts where the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities have not been accommodated yet, or they have not been implemented in such a way. So, as an autistic adult and academic and associate professor coming from a first world country like the US, explain your experiences visiting and speaking at these conferences or training sessions.
Oh, sure. Be glad to. After the pandemic lifted, I been traveling to about 2 different countries a month. And as you mentioned, I have spent some time in the Middle East. I was in Abu Dhabi in January, co-teaching a course for NYU Abu Dhabi campus on disability, justice, and radical inclusion. And what I found there was many people who were interested in understanding autistic individuals, and by extension, others who are neurodivergent and people with disabilities. So it was, to my great pleasant surprise, to find that there are a lot of efforts occurring in Abu Dhabi, as well as in Qatar, where a few weeks ago, Robert Nassif and I delivered an inclusive employment training program to the Qatari government. So it's good to see their efforts too. It's almost as if people in the Middle East have woken up and suddenly realized we have this huge population of people that we can engage and that we can include and develop a sense of belonging with our community. And for this, I find very encouraging. And what I also see these and other countries doing is they're taking a look at what we've done in the United States. We've been practicing inclusion. The emphasis is on practicing inclusion for a little over 50 years. And looking at our experiences and hopefully learning from our mistakes, and we'll be able to leap forward into developing some nice, authentic, and meaningful, inclusive policies in the areas of employment, education, involvement in the community, and other aspects of life.
Very interesting. And as you all know, that Robert Nassif is a well-known academic as well. He's also on the board of ICDL, and I'm privileged to be able to work with him on that note. But Malk, you've got a important question for Stephen with regards to the book Neurotribes.
Yes, I've been trying to see what I can find on Stephen before I talk to him. There is mention of him in Stephen Silberman's book Neurotribes, and I find that this correlates with your experience as well, Emile, and that is the important role that your parents played in your younger days, growing up and living with autism and accepting autism and so on.
Yeah, well, the role of parents is vitally important. That's where it starts. It all starts with the parents. And I think the biggest thing my parents did for me was that they accepted me for who I was as their autistic child, and at the same time realized that there was going to be a lot of work that needed to be done if I were to lead a fulfilling and productive life. And that is what caused them to reject the professionals' recommendations for institutionalization in favor of what we would today refer to as an intensive home-based early intervention program. And this was a program that emphasized music, movement, sensory integration, narration, and imitation. It probably looked like what they did, probably looked like one of the more developmental approaches we have today, such as floor time, such as Miller method, such as RDI, more child-centered in nature. And that's just today's terminology, because in those days, the concept of early intervention did not even exist. And really what it was, from my parents' point of view, were was just parents desperately trying to reach their child. And fortunately, they were able to do so.
Stephen, your parents, did they had any training in education, any similar fields, or
That's a
were
very
they?
question.
Mhm.
No, they did not have training in psychology, nor in education. My father owned a liquor store and then later was a manager of a frozen foods department in a supermarket. My mother mostly stayed at home. She had her hands full, taking care of me, taking care of my two siblings.
So it is very similar to Emile's situation with his parents. Um, as none of them had any training in psychology or education or any similar field. And should I say it is sure just desperation that made them put in the effort and try the best they could.
Yeah, they definitely did. And I think a real breakthrough was when uh, my parents' initial attempts to get me to imitate them failed. And imitation is a time-honored educational strategy. Everybody's used it, whether formally or an educator or not. Anytime you've shown somebody how to do something in effect in an effort to teach them how to do something, that's imitation. But perhaps due to a difference in mirror neurons, especially when we're young, imitation doesn't work. So then they flipped it around and they imitated me. But once they did that, I became aware of them in my environment. And I believe the key implication is that first, through this imitation, my parents met me where I was. And in doing so, they developed a trusting relationship. And I believe these are two key aspects, two prerequisites for doing meaningful and authentic work with an autistic person. Meet them where they are, develop that trusting relationship, then move on. And in fact, I think it holds true for everybody else as well, autistic or otherwise.
Emile, does it sound similar to your situation?
It does. There's a lot of resemblance. Something that you said, which was very important. I want to say two things. The importance of trust, because trust is, especially when you consider trust between the parent and the child, is very important. And it takes time for trust. And one of the biggest advice that I usually give parents is to make their support base strong, to form an ecosystem of people that you know that can support you. It is very important for us to be able to understand um, the phases in which parents are going through at the moment as well when they hear that their child is being diagnosed. Because first, the parent will basically reject the diagnosis. They're in the confusion phase. They do not know what to do. They do not know where to start. You discussed me a couple of instances as well with people that you're aware of.
Yes, I
So
think we can say it's like the 5 stages of grief.
yeah, it's similar to that as well. And therefore, to have the support system surrounding you is extremely important. Stephen, I want to basically relate uh, or change my question in terms of research. I attended a online session a couple of years ago where I attended a conference and I attended a conference from the World Bank, and they named four fundamentals in order to create an inclusive and accessible society for everyone. when it comes to the value of research, Stephen, how important is it? What is your opinion on the importance of research in the times that we live in? Do you see the value?
I do see the value of research because that is how we find out things. And what I believe is important in terms of research is to involve autistic people in research to the extent of our abilities, to the extent of our interests. And if we meaningfully and authentically involve autistic individuals in what is known as participatory research, then that greatly improves the validity and reliability of that research. And an example that comes to mind is my initial involvement in participatory research that involved seeking asking the question, what is the most challenging healthcare issue facing autistic individuals? And this started maybe about 5 years ago. I had spoken on a panel of autistic intelligence at an international meeting for International Society for Autism Research conference, INSAR. And it was after that meeting that I was approached, or perhaps more accosted, by an OT, Teal Benavides to be specific, who began talking about researching into medical issues facing autistic individuals. And initially I thought, well, who is this person? And then why would I want to research into medical issues anyways? Because I was focusing more on different strategies and interventions and supports for autistic people, but okay, I'd hear her out. And she said that an important area of study was finding what is the most challenging healthcare issue facing autistic people. And if we find that, then we can start doing something about it. So that eventually led to the acceptance of a research proposal that we developed to Patient Care Outcome Research Institute for an engagement award. And what that engagement award was is that it's very much like a grant. Half of it is scientific grant type thing, research that you do for a grant, and the other half was involved studying engagement, in this case of autistic people. So what we did is we started with a core team where half of this team was autistic and the other half was not autistic, just to show that us autistic people could be inclusive and include people who are not on the autism spectrum. And then we assembled a community council of mostly autistic people, 18 people, that would help drive the research, that would answer important questions from the viewpoint of autistic individuals. So the question, as I mentioned before, what is the most challenging healthcare issue facing autistic individuals? We also knew that we could probably do the study on our own and ask a number of doctors and other healthcare professionals and get a response probably related to maybe obesity or something else, and get that published. But wouldn't it be so much better to directly ask the autism community, and even better, involve the autistic community in the research with that community council? So 2 conferences later, a number of surveys, some focus groups, what came to the top, what is most on the minds of autistic individuals insofar as healthcare issues, is access to mental health supports. So mental health supports.
I can make 2 observations on that. The first is that, of course, if you've got autism, that leads to anxiety leads to irritable bowel syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
So there is, of course, other things that come along with autism that needs to be. The second observation is what Michael Foucault made in his History of Madness. I don't know if you're familiar with that, where he stated that improvement in the medical science started when the doctors started to listen to their patients. And I think this is similar here with autism. As improvement in the field will come the moment the professionals start listening to the autistic people. So there must be a communication between both.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to work together. And with this finding, which was validated by a group called Autistica in the United Kingdom, who also asked the same question, and they came up with the same results. Our two groups didn't know about each other's work. So this incidental validation, I think, is very important. And now that we know that mental health supports, access to such supports is most on the minds of autistic individuals, we're now able to parlay that work into a $9.2 million grant from PCORI, where we're looking into comparing two suicide prevention interventions, two interventions to prevent suicide for autistic individuals. Because that's another aspect of mental health, or a result of challenges to mental health, is the high rate of suicide in autistic individuals. It's one of the leading causes of death in autistic individuals. So we're about 1 year into the study. We've got 4 more years to go, and we look forward to hearing the results.
It is very important what you said just now. The living age of an individual with autism, based on the Southern Hemisphere paper, is 35 years old.
Mhm.
And it's due to the depression and isolationism that these individuals experience, and the discrimination when they were younger years ago. So it is very important for us to be able to work together with the community of practice, which is the teachers, the psychologists, the medical professionals, which will form part of the support structure of the family.
Yeah,
One of the
absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Now we are now we as we discussed just now or way back, it's now Autism Awareness Month, Acceptance Day, and there's a lot of activists that's doing advocacy. There's a lot of posts on social media. Your different departments are basically hosting sessions based on the experiences of a professional in academia, writing first-hand accounts, contribute to research. What do you think, if you think about um, your living conditions in the US, what do you think what needs to be done in order for us to get rid of the medical model, Stephen?
Well, we need to focus more on the societal model of autism, because the medical model, which is really good for medical issues, basically says there's something wrong and we need to fix it. And when you have a medical issue, such as maybe a stroke, a heart attack, or an appendicitis, there is something very wrong, and you want the doctor to fix it as soon as possible and send you along your way. Autism, on the other hand, as opposed to looking at it as a disorder, which is the medical model, I think it's better to look at it as a different order, a different type of order. It's a difference. And in that way, instead of focusing on the characteristics, which are so commonly defined as deficits in social communication, repetitive motions, restricted interest, sensory issues, let's change that D word to difference, a difference in communication. And we do communicate differently, and there are many situations where our type of communication is better than non-autistic communication, when we want things to be organized, direct, and straight to the point. There are also others of us on the spectrum who do not speak to communicate, formally referred to, or I would like to say formally referred to as nonverbal, but I much prefer the term non-speaking, because there's a lot more to spoken communication than just using words. A big part of it is understanding what language is and how it works. And I know many non-speaking autistic individuals who, before they got connected to an assistive communication device, they were just given up as being too autistic or too this or too that, and not being valued as individuals. However, once we find a reliable means of communication for autistic individuals who don't speak or have limited speaking ability, we find that they have the same range of intelligence as everybody else. So by moving towards the model, we ask the question, what modifications can we make in society to help and support autistic individuals, and as a result, usually making life better for everybody else?
And I think there we can have sort of something similar with albinism, where there was always believed that they are not so intelligent, that they've got low intelligence. And then at one stage it was realized that due to their eyesight, they could not see what's going on in the front of the classroom, and therefore they did not do good in tests. But when they received glasses, their performance in school improved. And I think we've got another problem with autism, as well as that sometimes we are limited to the forms of communication that is available to us. Like, for instance, the company said, no, phone us. A non-speaking autistic people cannot phone them. That isn't actually taking away his right to communicate. So companies must start to accept that they must integrate other forms of communication, like email, WhatsApp, whatever is available. That will make society more equitable.
It relates back to the social model towards inclusion accessibility, which I know that the UN strives for. A couple of years ago, Mark, you mentioned something that is very important. I want to hear Stephen's opinion with regards to this. They call it the Rain Man effect. Now, when you think about the
yes,
yes, I would because there's a lot of parents that will come to me and they will say that people they will tell that their child is on the autism spectrum, and then suddenly the people will start say that your child doesn't look autistic. Stephen, what would be your opinion regarding this?
Well, what does non-autistic look like? Autism is often people refer to autism as an invisible disability. It's not necessarily disability. I would go with autism as frequently being an invisible difference and the way we process and perceive information, process it, and express it. However, autism tends to be not so invisible to other autistic people. I find autistic people have a certain type of radar to detect other autistic people as well. So you don't look autistic. I think what that does is it puts limitations on autistic individuals as they expect us to look or perhaps behave in a certain way. However, with autism, there's great diversity within the autism spectrum. Sometimes I wonder if the diversity within the spectrum is greater than the diversity outside of the autism spectrum. And what this suggests is that you really need to get to know the autistic person as an individual autistic person.
Yeah, they say one person with autism, you've met one person with autism.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that's what I also usually say in all of the conferences, that you must try to meet the person behind the diagnosis, because that person will be someone that will blow your mind as well.
Right.
Definitely. We've got 7 minutes left, and I just want to basically one of my last questions, or one of my last contributions rather, is that Stephen, you're in the first world country. Myself and Maud, we are in South Africa. Now, when you consider the the cultures between different countries with the greatest respect, um, we understand that our socioeconomic circumstances are different. Our there's a lot of aspects in society with regards to religion, and and of course the way we grew up, our traditions, our culture. There's a lot of influences as well, and therefore yes, it's relevant when we read a lot of papers surrounding autism, but it's not always relevant from a South African perspective or from a Southern Hemisphere perspective, based on the circumstances that I just told you about. So it is important, it is very critical for us to be able to invest in research from the Southern Hemisphere. Stephen, what is your opinion surrounding research, and what do you think, what's the biggest gap that you currently find in research from a Southern Hemisphere perspective?
All right. Well, there's a number of gaps, and you were just talking about cultural relevance, which I believe is a huge gap. That is something that Robert Nassif and I worked to address as we developed our inclusive employment training curriculum. And while it wasn't research, I believe the concept of cultural relevance is the same. So, for example, when Robert or I, or both of us together, talk about employment, there are certain strategies that we often recommend that are very relevant to, well, I'll just say the United States, because that's where we grew up. One of them being involving young children in household chores. And that's great for us. But to bring that same recommendation to Qatar and to other areas in the Middle East, that would just fall flat. It would not work, because household chores tend to be done by a hired hand or an assistant or a maid or somebody else. So we can't use that recommendation, and to make that recommendation would be foolish. And it would also be alienating to the culture, in this case of Qatar, who we're talking to. So it is this experience that tells me that likewise for research, it is important for research to be culturally relevant. So Emile, your efforts in in focusing research for autistic people in South Africa, I believe is vitally important. And I believe as this body of research grows, then it will be very interesting to compare the results of research in South Africa and what is helpful in South Africa as in contrast to what is helpful, say, in the United States. And when we do that, that is when we can begin to learn from each other. Because as I travel, I find that wherever I go, no matter what the resources are present or lack of resources, there's always something important for me to learn from another culture in terms of supporting autistic individuals. A second gap in the literature that I see is research on autism and aging. There's beginning to be a little bit of research. And what people need to realize, and more people are realizing, is that autistic children grow up to be autistic adults. Autistic adults grow up to become autistic seniors. And what supports are needed for autistic people as they enter old age. So those are two areas, two gaps that I see. There's many more, but those are the two that come to mind.
Very
Well,
important.
that sounds like was in the past, as you would have said, that if a person or a child was diagnosed with autism, he was institutionalized, and that is where he stays for the rest of his life. No improvement or change in his life. But things have changed. Autistic people are now professionals, employed people, and at some time they're going to retire, and nothing of that has ever happened before. It is something that's totally new. And how should I say, me at my age would be maybe the first people. I'm 50 now. I'm 10, 15 years away from retirement. And that will be the first group of people from whom actually research can be done concerning old age and autism.
Yeah. Maud, we've got 1 minute and 10 seconds left of this meeting. So,
It's a real pleasure talking to you, Stephen.
Oh, and
And
likewise.
I think we've just touched a little point of the iceberg that's sticking out. There's so much that can be discussed in future. And yes, this is something that must be continued at some stage.
Oh,
And it
yeah.
was a real pleasure talking to you.
No, and likewise.
thank you, Stephen, and I can't wait, and I can't wait to work with you in future. There will be time for us to maybe have to continue with discussion, to have a second discussion with Stephen surrounding this. But thank you so much, and we value your contributions. And like I said,